After the flood, humanity was given a new beginning. The waters had receded. The ark had rested. The rainbow had appeared in the clouds. The world that had been corrupt and filled with violence was gone. And for a moment, it seemed as if history could begin again with humility. But the Bible does not let that hope remain untouched for long. Because soon after the flood, the story moves to a plain in the land of Shinar. There, humanity gathers. They speak one language. They share one purpose. They discover how to make bricks. They begin to build. And then they say the words that reveal the heart of the entire story. Let us make a name for ourselves. That is the mystery of the Tower of Babel. It is not only a story about language. It is not only a story about an ancient building. It is a story about human ambition after judgment. A story about unity without humility. A story about people who survived the flood but did not learn the deepest lesson of the flood. They had been told to fill the earth, but instead they gathered in one place. They had been given a world under God's promise, but instead they built a monument to their own name. They had seen what pride and corruption could do to the earth, but soon they reached upward again, not in worship, but in self-exaltation. The Tower of Babel stands in the Bible like a warning made of brick, a warning that even after judgment, the human heart still wants to climb, still wants to rule, still wants to become great without becoming humble. To understand Babel, we have to begin with what came before it. The flood was not just a disaster. It was judgment on a world that had become corrupt. Violence had filled the earth. The imagination of the human heart had turned toward evil. The old world had become so broken that creation itself seemed to need cleansing. Noah's ark carried life through that judgment. And after the waters receded, God gave humanity a renewed world. A world of covenant. A world of mercy. A world where life could continue. But mercy does not erase human pride automatically. A new world does not automatically create a new heart. That is why Babel comes so quickly in the story. It shows that the problem of humanity is deeper than the world around us. It is not only in cities, not only in systems, not only in kings or armies. It is in the human desire to define greatness apart from God. The people of Babel were not described as violent in the same way as the generation before the flood. They were builders, organizers, innovators. They had technology. They had unity. They had vision. But the Bible shows us that not every form of unity is good. Unity can be powerful, but unity without obedience can become rebellion. Unity without humility can become idolatry. Unity without God can become a tower. This is one of the most important lessons of Babel. The people were not divided because they were weak. They were divided because their unity had become dangerous. They had one language, one speech, one project, one ambition. And that ambition was not simply to build a city. It was to build a name. Let us make a name for ourselves. Those words reveal everything. A name in the ancient world was more than a label. It was identity, fame, memory, legacy, authority. To make a name for yourself was to secure your own greatness. To say, we will not be forgotten. We will not be scattered. We will build something high enough, strong enough, permanent enough that history will have to remember us. That desire is still deeply human. We build our names in many ways. Through power, through wealth, through monuments, through cities, through empires, through reputation, through the need to be seen. The people of Babel built with bricks. But the impulse behind the bricks is much older and much closer than we might want to admit. Babel is what happens when human beings try to turn greatness into self-worship. The tower itself is often imagined as reaching into the heavens, but the deeper issue is not architecture. It is direction. The people are reaching upward without bowing downward. They want height without holiness. They want heaven without surrender. They want a name without receiving it from God. That is why the story is so powerful. Because the tower is both impressive and empty. It rises from the earth, but it is rooted in pride. It reaches toward the sky, but it does not lead to God. It gathers people together, but it gathers them around human glory. This is the danger of Babel. It looks like progress. It looks like civilization. It looks like strength. But beneath the surface, it is fear. Fear of being scattered. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being small. The people say they want to make a name for themselves, so they will not be dispersed over the face of the earth. That matters, because spreading across the earth was part of humanity's calling. From the beginning, humans were blessed to fill the earth. After the flood, that calling was repeated. But at Babel, people resist the calling. They gather. They centralize. They build upward instead of going outward. They choose control over trust. They choose safety and human greatness over obedience to divine purpose. And when human beings gather around fear, pride is often close behind. The tower becomes a fortress against obedience, a monument against scattering, a structure built to hold humanity together on humanity's own terms. Then the story gives us one of its most striking ironies. The people build a tower with its top in the heavens, but God has to come down to see it. That detail is almost humorous, but also profound. The tower that seemed so great from the ground is small before heaven. The monument humans believed would reach the sky is not impressive to God. The thing built to make a name for humanity only reveals how small human pride really is. This is a pattern throughout Scripture. Humanity builds upward. God looks downward. Human beings measure greatness by height. God measures by the heart. The people of Babel thought their tower would secure their future, but heaven saw the danger in their unity. Not because God fears human architecture, not because a brick tower threatened the throne of heaven, but because united pride can magnify human rebellion. When people become one around the wrong purpose, their strength becomes dangerous. That is why God confuses their language. At first, this can sound like punishment only. And yes, it is judgment, but it is also mercy. God interrupts a project that would have carried human pride further and further. He scatters the people so they cannot continue building a world around their own name. The confusion of languages is not random chaos. It is a divine interruption, a limit placed on pride, a boundary placed on ambition, a way of preventing humanity from becoming unified in rebellion. In that sense, Babel is similar to earlier stories. In Eden, a boundary is crossed. Before the flood, corruption fills the earth. At Babel, human ambition gathers itself into one tower. Again and again, the Bible shows what happens when human beings refuse limits. They reach, they take, they build, they make names. But the result is never true life. The result is exile, judgment, scattering, confusion. The people wanted one name, but they received many languages. They wanted one city, but they were scattered across the earth. They wanted to make themselves unforgettable, but the place was remembered as Babel, a name associated with confusion. This is the deep reversal of the story. The monument to human greatness becomes a symbol of human limitation. The tower built to prevent scattering becomes the reason they are scattered. The city built to secure one language becomes the place where language is divided. Babel is the collapse of self-made glory. And yet, the story does not end with chaos. Because in the biblical story, the scattering of nations sets the stage for something greater. Soon after Babel, the Bible turns to one man, Abram, later called Abraham. Humanity tries to make a name for itself at Babel. But then God calls Abraham and says he will make Abraham's name great. That contrast is essential. At Babel, people try to seize a name. With Abraham, God gives a name. At Babel, humanity gathers in pride. With Abraham, God begins a promise. At Babel, the nations are scattered. Through Abraham, all nations will eventually be blessed. This is one of the most beautiful movements in the Bible. God does not abandon the nations after Babel. He begins a plan to bless them. The division of languages is not the end of the story. It becomes part of a larger story of redemption. The nations are scattered, but they are not forgotten. Human pride is judged, but divine mercy continues. That is why Babel matters so much. It explains more than the origin of languages. It explains the fractured world. Different peoples, different tongues, different nations, different cultures. A world divided by confusion, yet still under the eye of God. And it raises a question that echoes through history. Can humanity be truly united without humility? Babel says no. Unity built on pride becomes dangerous. Unity built on self-glory becomes a tower. Unity that refuses God becomes confusion. But the Bible does not reject unity itself. It rejects false unity. The story moves toward a different kind of unity later. Not a unity built by human pride. Not a tower reaching upward, but a people gathered by God. A unity not based on making a name for ourselves, but on receiving a name from Him. That is why the contrast between Babel and later biblical hope is so powerful. At Babel, languages are confused. Later, the dream of many nations worshiping God appears throughout Scripture. At Babel, people gather to exalt themselves. Later, people from every tribe, tongue, and nation are pictured giving glory not to themselves, but to God. Babel is not the final word over the nations. It is the wound that later redemption must heal. But before that healing, the wound is real. Human beings still build Babels, not always with bricks, sometimes with systems, sometimes with empires, sometimes with technology, sometimes with fame, sometimes with the desperate need to be remembered. Every age builds towers. Every age has ways of saying, "Let us make a name for ourselves." And every age must face the question, what are we building? Are we building in obedience or in pride? Are we building to serve or to be worshipped? Are we building because God has called us forward or because we are afraid to be scattered? Babel is not against building. It is against prideful building. It is not against cities. It is against human greatness that forgets God. It is not against language, culture, or civilization. It is against the human desire to replace God with our own name. That is why Babel remains so relevant. Because the tower is more than an ancient ruin. It is a mirror. It shows us the danger of ambition without humility, progress without obedience, unity without truth, technology without wisdom, greatness without God. The people of Babel wanted to reach heaven, but they did not want heaven to rule them. They wanted a name, but not the name God gives. They wanted unity, but not the unity of obedience. They wanted security, but not the trust that comes from walking with God. So the tower stopped. The languages changed. The people scattered. And the great project became a warning to every generation that tries to build heaven by human pride. But there is still mercy in the scattering. Because sometimes God stops what would destroy us if it succeeded. Sometimes confusion is judgment, but sometimes judgment is also protection. Babel teaches that not every interrupted plan is a meaningless failure. Sometimes God interrupts a tower because the tower is becoming an idol. Sometimes He scatters what pride is gathering. Sometimes He breaks the illusion that we can save ourselves by building higher. The Tower of Babel was never tall enough to reach heaven, but it was tall enough to reveal the human heart. And that is why it still stands in memory. Not as a triumph, but as a warning. A monument to the moment humanity tried to make its own name great after the flood. The old world had been judged by water. The new world had been given mercy. But soon, people built again. Not an ark of obedience, a tower of pride. And heaven came down. The nations were divided. The languages were confused. Humanity was scattered across the earth. But God's purpose was not finished. Out of the scattered world, He would call Abraham. Out of division, He would begin a promise. Out of human pride, He would still move history toward blessing. That is the mystery behind the divided nations. Babel shows us what humanity becomes when it reaches upward without humility. But it also shows us that God is not defeated by human confusion. He can scatter. He can call. He can judge. He can bless. and he can begin again even after the tower falls silent. In the next episode, we will follow one of the most mysterious figures connected to the world after the flood. A mighty hunter, a king, a builder of cities, a name remembered in the shadow of Babel. Nimrod, the first mighty king after the flood.